The room was cloaked in a palpable silence, the kind that makes every rustle of paper or movement of a chair feel amplified. The spotlight on the stage illuminated one man, Elon Musk. Known for his visionary ideas and unrelenting pursuit of progress, tonight he was not here to discuss electric cars, reusable rockets, or even colonizing Mars. No, tonight's topic was something far deeper, something that had puzzled humanity for millennia. Elon stepped forward, his expression uncharacteristically serious. His eyes scanned the audience, which was composed of some of the brightest minds in the world: scientists, philosophers, technologists, and intellectuals. Then he asked a question that sent a wave of murmurs rippling through the crowd. "How many of you believe in God?" The question was simple, but the weight of it seemed to press down on the room. Some audience members hesitantly raised their hands. Others kept theirs firmly by their sides, avoiding eye contact. The majority, however, just stared at him, waiting for him to elaborate. Elon let the silence linger, his gaze sweeping across the faces in the crowd. He wasn't here to provide answers. That much was clear. Instead, he was here to provoke thought, to challenge assumptions. Finally, he broke the silence. "Faith and science," he began, his voice calm yet commanding. "Two forces that have shaped the world in profound ways. Many believe they are in conflict, that they cannot coexist. Others believe they are intertwined, two sides of the same coin. But what if the truth lies somewhere in between?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. The audience, captivated, leaned forward in their seats. "I'm not here tonight to give you answers," Elon continued. "I don't have them, but I want to share a journey, a personal journey that has brought me closer to understanding this question, even if the answer remains elusive." Elon began his story by recounting his childhood. Born in South Africa, he was raised in a household where logic, reason, and evidence were king. His father, an engineer, often reminded him, "If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist." It was a mantra that shaped Elon's early worldview. As a young boy, he spent countless hours devouring books on science, engineering, and physics. He was fascinated by the laws of the universe, the elegance of gravity, the mysteries of quantum mechanics, and the mind-bending possibilities of space exploration. God, however, was never a topic of discussion in the Musk household. "I wasn't raised religious," Elon admitted, his voice steady. "To me, the universe was a machine governed by natural laws. If something couldn't be proven or explained through science, it wasn't real. Simple as that." But as he grew older, cracks began to form in this rigid, evidence-based worldview. It wasn't one monumental event that caused him to question everything, but a series of subtle moments that planted seeds of doubt in his mind. Elon recounted one of those moments, a night in his late 20s when he was standing on the rooftop of his apartment in Palo Alto. The city lights shimmered below, but his eyes were fixed on the stars above. The vastness of the universe overwhelmed him. He had always been captivated by space, its infinite expanse, its mysteries waiting to be unraveled. But that night, as he gazed at the stars, he felt something different. "It wasn't just awe," he said, pausing as if to gather his thoughts. "It was a sense of connection, a feeling that the universe wasn't just a random collection of atoms and energy, that there was something deeper, something beyond what science could explain." He described how he stood there for hours, the cool night air brushing against his skin as questions flooded his mind. Was the universe simply a cosmic accident? Or was there a purpose behind its existence? And if there was, who or what had given it that purpose? These questions were unsettling, Elon admitted. For someone who had built his life on logic and evidence, the idea of something unprovable, something beyond the scope of science, was hard to accept. Years later, a conversation with a mentor brought these questions back to the forefront of Elon's mind. The mentor, A brilliant physicist whose work Elon deeply admired had once told him, "Science is the pursuit of truth, but not all truths can be found in a lab." At the time, Elon had dismissed the statement as philosophical nonsense. To him, science was the ultimate tool for understanding the universe. But as he stood on that stage, recounting the conversation, he realized how profoundly it had shaped him. "We know how the universe began," he said, addressing the audience. "The Big Bang. But what caused it? What existed before it? What was the force that set everything into motion?" The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. "You can't prove the existence of God through a microscope or a telescope," Elon continued. "You can't measure faith with data. But does that mean God doesn't exist? Or does it mean we don't yet have the tools to understand?" Elon shifted the conversation to his own experiences. He spoke about the early days of SpaceX, when failure seemed inevitable. Rockets exploded, funds dwindled, and critics called his dream of reusable. "Rockets a fantasy. There were moments when logic told me to give up," Elon admitted. "The data was clear. The odds were against us. But something kept me going. It wasn't science. It was faith. Not in a religious sense, but faith in the mission, in the belief that what we were doing mattered." He explained how faith had carried him through those darkest times, not just in SpaceX, but in every endeavor he had undertaken. "Faith and science aren't enemies," he said. "They're partners. Science asks how the universe works. Faith asks why. And sometimes the answers overlap. Sometimes they don't. But both are essential to understanding who we are and why we're here." When Elon finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. But the night wasn't over. After the speech, many attendees approached him, eager to share their thoughts. One was an elderly man with a face lined by age and wisdom. "I've spent my whole life searching for that answer," the man said softly. "Is there something greater out there? Thank you for reminding me that the search itself is part of the journey." A young woman, clutching a small cross around her neck, stepped forward next. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I've always had faith," she said. "But sometimes it's hard. The universe is so vast, so full of things I don't understand. How do you keep searching when the answers aren't clear?" Elon's expression softened. "I think the key," he said, "is to embrace the unknown, to let both faith and science guide us. It's okay to not have all the answers. That's what makes us human." Her tears turned to a smile as she nodded, as if a weight had been lifted. Later that night, Elon stepped outside, the cool air brushing against his face. He looked up at the stars, their light piercing through the darkness of the cosmos. The universe was vast, incomprehensible, and mysterious, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt connected. "Does God exist?" he whispered to himself. He didn't know, and maybe he never would. But as he stood there, staring into the infinite expanse, he realized that the search for truth, whether through science, faith, or both, was what gave life its meaning. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As Elon stood under the stars that night after his speech, the questions continued to swirl in his mind. He thought back to the countless sleepless nights during SpaceX's early days. There were times when success seemed so far out of reach that even his most loyal supporters questioned whether they were chasing an impossible dream. The failures were relentless. One rocket after another exploded, millions of dollars vanished into thin air, and the ridicule from the media was unrelenting. He remembered one specific evening vividly. It was the day SpaceX's third Falcon 1 rocket had failed to reach orbit. It was a moment that could have ended everything. They had just enough money left for one more launch. If it failed, SpaceX would be finished. He was sitting alone in his office late at night, staring at the detailed reports of what had gone wrong. The data was clear. The odds were stacked against them. Statistically, their chances of success were slim. Logic dictated that they should cut their losses and walk away, and yet, something inside him refused to let go. What kept me going? Elon had asked himself that question many times. Was it pure stubbornness, a refusal to admit defeat, or was it something deeper, an unwavering belief that they were doing something that mattered, something that transcended profit or personal success? He realized that what had driven him in those moments wasn't logic or evidence, it was faith. Faith in the idea that their mission was worth fighting for, even if the odds were slim. It wasn't the kind of faith tied to religion, but it was faith nonetheless. A belief in something greater than himself, something intangible and unmeasurable. Standing on the stage earlier that evening, Elon had mentioned something that resonated deeply with the audience. Science asks how, but faith asks why. It wasn't an original idea. He knew that. He'd borrowed it from centuries of philosophical thought, but it was a phrase that encapsulated his journey perfectly. He thought about Galileo, one of his childhood heroes. Galileo had been a man of science, a pioneer who had defied the church to champion the heliocentric model of the solar system. Yet even Galileo, a staunch advocate for reason, had spoken of the mystery of creation as something that science alone could not fully explain. Elon had always been fascinated by the intersection of science and philosophy. As a young man, he'd read Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot, which described Earth as a tiny speck suspended in a sunbeam surrounded by the vastness of the cosmos. The book had filled him with a sense of awe, but also with questions. If humanity was so small, so insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe, what was the point of it all? What was the purpose of existence? Back in the auditorium, after Elon's speech, the conversations among the audience were electric. Groups of people gathered in small circles, debating and reflecting on what they had just heard. One man, a physicist in his 60s, turned to his colleague and said, "I've spent my entire career trying to understand the mechanics of the universe, but I've never stopped to ask myself why it exists in the first place." Musk may not have the answers, but he's right. The question itself is worth exploring. Nearby, a young woman in her 20s sat quietly, clutching her notebook. She had come to the talk hoping for inspiration for her thesis on artificial intelligence, but she had left with far more than that. Elon's words about faith and science resonated with her in a way she hadn't expected. She recalled her own struggles with doubt. As a child, she had been deeply religious, raised in a household where faith was everything. But as she grew older and immersed herself in the world of technology and data, she found herself drifting further away from those beliefs. Science had become her new religion. Yet tonight, for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. What if faith and science aren't opposites? She thought. What if they're both just different ways of searching for the same truth? As Elon made his way toward the back of the room after his talk, a man in a white lab coat approached him. His face was lined with worry, but there was a spark of curiosity in his eyes. "I wasn't sure what to expect from your talk tonight," the man admitted, his voice low. "But you've given us all something to think about. I've always been a man of science. Data, evidence, experimentation, that's how I've made sense of the world. But now, for the first time, I'm wondering if there's room for both."